All right, welcome everyone to TAM Lab. Today on our Nano Lab session here, we're excited to have Zachary Johnson and Jason Schertzinger joining us, and they're going to be covering the Adobe Flash end of life announcement and what that means for some of our very popular VMware products. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and I'll hand it over to Zach.
Thank you for the handoff, Steve. So as Steve said, we will today be talking about the end of life for Adobe Flash Player and what that means for people who are using VMware software. So let's talk very quickly about an agenda. We won't spend very much time at all on that. Um, We'll start with a summary of what's actually going to happen and why it's happening, and then we'll talk about some of the key VMware products that are going to be impacted. And lastly, we will do some demos to describe what you can do to be prepared about this. In terms of what's actually happening, most people are probably going to be aware by now that Adobe announced way back in 2017 that they are going to be end-of-lifing Flash Player. And we are now about 2 months from when that planned end of life date is supposed to occur. And I've provided some links here if people want to click on those links to go explore the announcements. You can certainly feel free to do that. The other thing that's happening is in parallel with Adobe announcing that Flash Player is going end of life, the major web browser manufacturers have made additional announcements about how they're going to approach that. And it's not for me to recite that to you and interpret its meaning. But what I do want to highlight is that Microsoft seems to have already released the Windows patch that is intended to uh, remove support for Flash Player from their browsers, and that is KB 4577586, according to the information that I have as of today. Let me be clear, there could be additional KBs in the future, but as of today, this is the one that I know about. And I want to also say that the demo you're going to see today has that KB actually installed. And let me just very quickly show that. You can see I do have Flash Player still installed, even though that KB has been installed. You can see that the actual KB is listed as one of the installed hotfixes. And the last thing that I'm going to say here is this should not impact most customers who are using the latest versions of VMware products. This is largely going to impact customers who are using older versions of our products. So if you've got an old version of vCenter or an old version of vCloud Director, this video is really for you. If you've got vSphere 7 installed and if you've got Horizon 8 installed, this video is informational, but should largely not have an impact on your day-to-day activities. So with that out of the way, let's talk about the actual impact. A few points to keep in mind before we go through the list of products in the table. The first is pay attention to plugins for vCenter, whether those are first-party plugins for things like vRealize operations or third-party plugins, and I'm not going to name names. If you're using the Flash version of vCenter, then you necessarily should consider any plugins to be equally impacted. If you're using the HTML5 version of vCenter, then as long as there is a plugin that is compatible with the HTML5 version of vCenter, then that plugin should continue to work. With regard to third-party plugins, certainly make sure you check with the vendor for those plugins to confirm that they will continue to work or to understand which functionality may not continue to work after December. Next thing I'll say is a lot of things in vSphere are managed through vCenter. So, for example, vSAN is not broken out explicitly in the list to the right. and that's because the administration portal for vSAN is vCenter. So if you're running a version of vCenter that is impacted, then vSAN is impacted for you too. If you're running a version of vCenter that is not impacted, then vSAN is not impacted. And the last thing I want to say is the list on the right is not complete. Certainly the further back in history you go, the more VMware products you will find that used Flash. We've attempted to go back relatively far into the past for the major products. So if you're using a product that's not in this list, please don't be surprised. So with that out of the way, let's talk about the actual products that are listed. The first one is vSphere, vCenter, vSAN. There was a partial HTML5 vCenter UI that was released as a fling and then available in 6.5, and it was matured over time until vSphere 6.7 Update 1, at which time VMware declared that it was feature complete. Now, I want to clarify that does not necessarily mean that there is feature parity. It was not a copy and paste of the functionality from Flash into the HTML5 UI. And so there are some changes when moving from the Flash UI to the HTML5 UI. So what you should expect is if you're running vCenter 6.5 or lower, and if you're currently using the Flash-based vCenter UI, you should plan to upgrade to vCenter 6.7 Update 3 or to vCenter 7. Certainly pay attention to the KB article that's provided in the table. That will give you some extra detail around which components need to be upgraded and which ones don't. Certainly pay attention to compatibility. For example, if you've got a vSphere 5.5 host that is managed by a 6.5 vCenter, you're not going to be able to upgrade that vCenter to 6.7 without removing the host first. In terms of vCloud Director, the impact here is a little bit different than it is for all of the others. There's two Flash-based UIs in vCloud Director. One of them is an operator-facing portal, and the other one is an end-user-facing portal. The end-user-facing portal had a partial HTML5 UI available starting in vCloud Director 9.0, whereas the provider portal only began to see a partial HTML5 UI replacement in version 9.5. And not until vCloud Director 10 were the UIs largely feature complete. There is a link in the table that you should explore. There are some features that did not exist in the 10.0 UI that were added in the 10.1 UI. So it may be the case that you're on 10.0, but some functionality that you need in the Flash UI doesn't exist for you yet. So make sure that you pay attention to that. While I said that there's two UIs impacted, and while HTML5 versions became available with different releases, you should plan to upgrade your entire environment to 10.1 or later. With regard to Site Recovery Manager, if you're running 6.5 and below, you should expect that you are impacted. If you are running version 8.1 or newer, it's my understanding that you should not be impacted as long as you're using vCenter 6.7 Update 3 or newer. For Horizon, the Flash-based UI was called Horizon Administrator, and its HTML5 replacement was called Horizon Console. Horizon Console shipped in 7.8, but as with all of our other UIs, it matured over time, and so you shouldn't consider it feature complete until version 7.11. With regard to vRealize Orchestrator, automation, and operations, there are plugins for vCenter for those products, and so if you're using a Flash-based vCenter, then those plugins would be impacted. If you're using an HTML5 version of vCenter, then those plugins should not be impacted. And lastly, with regard to NSX, Let me say right off the top that NSXT does not use Flash, so this impact is limited to NSXV. And there are some additional details that we're going to get into with regard to how NSXV is impacted, but the short answer is any version of NSXV is going to have some impact depending on the features that you use. So I'm not going to take the time to read this over the audio just because there's so much content here. I encourage you to just click pause in your browser and make sure that you understand which features for NSX were added to the vSphere HTML5 client with which version of NSX to decide how you're impacted. And also pay attention to the table on the right that explains what features were deprecated. And the last thing I'm going to say about NSX, again, pause your screen if you want to be able to visit the actual URLs. The release notes for things that have been added over time for NSX are available, and that is largely summarized in the previous slide. The first KB article that's linked that ends with 7.8, that link is not currently live, but it will be soon. We're including it now just so that the YouTube video is future-proof. And that describes the actual end of life statement from the NSX product group. The last KB article talks specifically about the deprecation of SSL VPN, and there's a KB article provided at the end of the day. The option for the customers who are using SSL VPN Plus is either to use the NSX API to administer it, or for customers who have vCloud Director, keeping in mind that vCloud Director has some Flash impact too, which would mean you would need to have a version of vCloud Director that is 10.1 or higher. Then you can administer SSL VPN Plus using vCloud Director with the exception of the two noted features. So in terms of a demonstration, I want to preface this with two statements. One is VMware's recommended solution is to upgrade your VMware software to the latest versions that don't have a Flash dependency. For customers who can't do that, while VMware does not recommend it, you are able to use the enterprise enablement functionality that is provided by Adobe for Flash Player, which is what we're going to demonstrate here, to create what's called an allow list to allow continued access by web browsers to Flash-based content. Again, we don't recommend this, but we want to make sure that you understand what that process would look like if you elected to do it. And in the KB articles that VMware is posting, I believe today or tomorrow, there should be some statements in there with regard to Horizon 7 and vSphere 6.7 having some amount of support remaining on them, even for versions that have the Flash-based UI. And for those customers who are using the Flash-based versions and who still do have support entitlement, then in effect, if you can get a browser that works with Flash, then VMware is indicating that they will provide support to you for the duration of the support window. All right, with that out of the way, let's jump into the demo. I wanted to make sure that you saw a large screenshot of exactly what this is going to look like before we move into the browser. If you go to a Flash-based website, this is what you're going to see. And if you click on the image, that image is going to take you to Adobe's Flash end of life announcement page. And there's a couple of links there that you can certainly feel free to click around and explore. In effect, what you should think is sometime in the December or early January timeframe, when you go to vCenter or vCloud Director, you're going to get this page. And I'm going to walk you through what you could do, which VMware does not recommend, in order to work around that. So firstly, let's go over to our web browser. This is helpx.adobe.com, and this is basically allowing us to test whether Flash Player works. And when you click the Check Now button, it is going to indicate right now that Flash Player does not work. And following the enterprise enablement instructions, you will see that there is a configuration file, and that configuration file is operating system and browser specific in terms of its location. The contents of the file are not different on a per OS, per browser basis, but the location where that file is stored is. And by default, you're going to see a configuration file that looks most like this probably. And the only reason I can think why your config file would look different than this when you first open it would be if your company has applied policy on end user machines using something like Active Directory group policy. And so what we're going to do is we're going to add a couple of lines. And again, all of this is documented in Adobe's Flash Player administration guide in the enterprise enablement section. What we want to do is we want to temporarily add a trace output echo equals 1 statement. And what this is going to do is if we go to our web browser and we load up the web developer tools, and these should exist in Edge, Firefox, Chrome, Internet Explorer. Method of access is perhaps a little different, but the functionality exists in all of them. If we go to the web browser, web developer tools, and we click on web console, then any Flash-based site we visit, once we have that trace output echo equals 1 statement in our configuration file, is going to log statements about Shockwave Flash being enabled or blocked. And that's helpful for us when we attempt to add a URL to the allow list to make sure that it did actually work. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to uncomment this allow list preview statement. And this, again, is just intended to help troubleshoot the creation of the allow list initially. You don't need to leave that parameter in your configuration file. And the absolute minimum things you're going to want to add are these two lines. The enable allow list line is the thing that overrides the blocked by default behavior in Adobe Flash Player starting in the December-January timeframe. Without this statement, Flash sites will not load. Once you've added that statement, then Adobe Flash Player is going to look in the configuration file for all of these allow list URL pattern parameters, and you can have as many of these in the file as you need. And so for the sake of this demo, all you see is that I've added an allow list URL pattern for adobe.com and macromedia.com. For vCenter, you would be using either the IP address or the fully qualified domain name of your vCenter. For vCloud Director, obviously you would want to instead use the FQDN or the IP address of the provider portal or the tenant portal, and so on for our other products. Once we have added those statements and saved the file, then when we go back to our web browser and we click on refresh, we can see that certainly our allow list preview statement is working. And we can see that the allow list does allow this traffic. And if we click on check now, we're going to get a congratulations message showing that we've successfully whitelisted the functionality. So just as a final reminder, VMware is not recommending that this be done. Certainly, we want people to be on the latest versions of our products just in general, but in particular, remember that the reason this is happening is that Flash Player is going end of life, and that means that there aren't going to be any bug fixes, there aren't going to be any security fixes, there's not going to be any functionality enhancements released by Adobe for Flash Player going forward. And as a result of that, it makes sense for customers to stop using Flash Player. And with that, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Jason, who has one more demo for us.
Hi, I'm Jason Schertzinger, Technical Account Manager with VMware. In this video, I'll be walking you through how to set up a custom version of Firefox Portable that contains embedded Flash Player. You can use this version to access websites and management utilities that require the use of Flash. Please note that VMware does not support or recommend the use of this software, and use of it is entirely at your own risk. These are out-of-date versions, and they're not supported by VMware, Mozilla, or Adobe. To get started, go to the WordPress link. Notice that it says Firefox version 71 does not allow plugins to load directly. That means we'll need an older version of Firefox. We also need an older version of Firefox that supports disabling automatic updates. I've done some searching and found that 60.9 seems to be the latest version that both supports loading plugins locally as well as disabling auto updates. Click the link in the blog to download the portable version of Flash Player. Get the 64-bit version. When that's downloaded, go to the SourceForge link and download version 60.9 of Firefox ESR. I'm downloading the English version. When that's downloaded, go ahead and run the executable. And extract the files. You can check the box to open Firefox now. Make sure you tell it not to update. Go into the Options menu. Scroll down and change the settings to never check for updates and uncheck background services to update and automatically update search engines. Then go to about:config in the URL bar, accept the risk, and search for plugins.local. Double-click the option to change the value to true, and then you can close the window. Open up the Firefox Portable folder, go under Data, Plugins. Now open the 7-zip file that you downloaded containing the Flash Player and drag the DLL file from there into the Plugins folder. Open the Firefox Portable. Go to the menu again. Go down to Add-ons. Go to Plugins. Now you've got the Shockwave Flash plugin listed there. Change it to Always Activate. Click on More. And then change the setting to Block Dangerous and Intrusive Flash Content. And that's it. At this point, the Flash plugin is installed. And if you want to test it out, I just did a search for Test Adobe Flash Player. And click the link on Adobe's page to test it. And then click on Test Your Adobe Flash Player Installation. And we see the animation loads, and it tells us the version that's installed. And that's it. At this point, you have a portable version of Firefox that can run Flash content. You can zip it up and distribute it as you need. Thank you.